Hey guys, it's Mrs. Beaulieu, and I noticed that some people were struggling with this writing quiz in our course to write complex and compound complex sentences. So I'm going to go through a few things just to clarify so that you can do an excellent job on this quiz. First of all, it's real important before you start to write the different kinds of sentences that you understand what these main categories are. A fragment, which is just a piece of a sentence that doesn't make sense by itself. Remember, an independent clause, also known as a sentence that can stand by its own, has to have a subject doing a verb, and it has to make sense. So if there is any word in there that creates new meaning and makes you realize that you need to have some more information, that is going to be a dependent clause and it won't make sense. So in this uh, example, this is actually a fragment. It's not a complete sentence, even though it looks like it might be. The doctors, and then right here we have a who clause. It tells us what kind of doctors, or specifically which doctors. The doctors who were using peer-reviewed research articles that contributed to the body of knowledge in their fields. This whole thing just tells us more about those doctors. Which was obstetrics. It does not tell us at all what the doctors are doing. There is no verb. Therefore, this is a fragment of a sentence. Be careful not to create a fragment. This example right here is what we call a run-on. A run-on is simply when someone writes two completely, totally different sentences and doesn't use proper punctuation. It just means that in this situation, there are two sentences that are smashed together. The first sentence is right here. The subject is flowers, and the verb is are. The beautiful describes the flowers. So the flowers are beautiful. That's a complete independent clause. They brighten the room. That also is a complete independent clause. When there's no attempt to separate the two sentences at all, then we call that a run-on. It just runs on. And you could have a run-on with more than just two, but that's what this simple example is. We need to separate the two sentences. Now, in this situation, I got the same exact sentence. Whoever wrote it knew intuitively that they should be separated. The problem here is that the writer used the wrong piece of punctuation. So right here, they just added a comma. Two independent clauses, also known as sentences, smashed together, put together incorrectly with a comma. So that comma is splicing the two sentences together, and so we call it a comma splice. The way to fix it, I'll show you in a few minutes. So the person knew that they should be separated, they just used the wrong tool. This right here is a perfect number D. Nothing is wrong with this. I love to write papers. That's an independent clause by itself. I would write one every day if I had the time. That, again, is an independent sentence all by itself. What happened here is the person correctly used a semicolon. And what I like to do when I think of a semicolon is to look at it and to realize that what is in a semicolon? It's got a comma on the bottom. And that comma tells us, these two things are really closely related to each other. The period part on top of the semicolon just tells us, yeah, I have the power. I'm a period. I have the power to separate these two different independent clauses. So this is a perfect sentence, a compound sentence combined properly with a semicolon. Now, there are other ways that we could combine sentences. Right here, we're going back to our original example. The flowers are beautiful. End of sentence. They brighten the room. End of sentence. This is perfectly fine. You can separate these two sentences this way. But here's another way to do it. With a semicolon. The flowers are beautiful. Full stop. but it's so closely related. I really want you to understand that these ideas are so closely related that they could be, the same thought. So I'm only going to use a comma as well. So they brighten the room. That's the power of a semicolon. This works. Here we're using a fanboy. Remember we learned fanboys. Those are, another word for them are conjunctions. And they're the words F for, A for and, N for nor, B for but, O for or, Y for yet, S for so. You can use any of those in this situation. The flowers are beautiful and they brighten the room. So this is what we call a compound sentence, exactly like this is a compound sentence. Either one of these are perfectly legitimate ways to separate those two sentences. Now here's another way to separate them. But we no longer have a compound sentence. The flowers are beautiful because they brighten the room. This because is turning this, it is no longer, the second half of it is no longer an independent thought. Because they brighten the room cannot be by itself. It cannot stand on its own. Therefore, this is no longer a compound sentence. It's what we call a complex sentence. And the front part of it in this situation is a independent clause. It can stand by itself, but this one can't stand by itself. So we call it dependent. It depends on something else to make sense. So it's still a great sentence and it's punctuated correctly and it's fine. It's just no longer a compound now, it's a complex. So that's a good introduction because you have to write compound and complex sentences. So first of all, let's look at how you make a compound sentence. Well, you have one simple sentence plus another simple sentence. This is one way to connect it with a comma and the fanboy and putting a period at the end, just like we saw. You could also use that semicolon. You could just get rid of this whole thing. And instead of using a comma, whoa, that's a picture. I can't. You would use a semicolon. Whoa, right there. Okay, so that's a compound sentence. Easy peasy, right? This is where we get into the complex sentences that get a little bit more confusing. Now, earlier in the year, I taught you how to add one of these words. Add one of these words to a subject and a verb. And it no longer can stand on its own because these change the meaning. And one way to remember is www.asia.bub. And I just do that because it's easy for me to remember when, while, where, as, since, if, although, because, unless, before. Yes, there are other words that act as what are they? Adjectival conjunctions, whatever. It doesn't matter if you know what the word means. Adverbial conjunctions, I'm sorry. It just depends on whether you can use them or not. So what we're going to do here, one way to do it is you don't use a comma if you're going to put a dependent clause at the end of your sentence. Remember, there must be a subject and a verb, but if you said, I eat bananas. That is a perfectly beautiful sentence by itself, but I want to combine it with this other one. And I just used one of these words to help myself out. I'll say whenever, I'll say when, I'll use when. When I feel sad. When I feel sad is not an independent sentence by itself. It cannot stand on its own. If I got rid of the when, it could, but I specifically added it in there because I'm trying to make a complex sentence. So if I put these two together, I eat bananas when I feel sad, I would not capitalize it. And I would not add a comma. Well, where did it go? There. Now I have a complex sentence. That's one way to do it. Another way to write a complex sentence is simply to put the dependent clause at the beginning. And if I do that, and I say, when I feel sad, I eat bananas. Now I have to add the comma. Why? I don't know. I don't make the rules. It just is the rule. And then you add your period at the end. Okay? Complex sentence. Very, very easy. Now the next thing we're going to do is you have to write a compound complex sentence. So how can we do that? First way is to write a simple sentence, connect it with a fanboy and a comma, another simple sentence. So then you've got your compound. See this compound? But then you also have to add a complex. Notice there's no comma right here because the complex dependent clause comes at the end of the sentence. So we don't need to add that comma. A second way to do this is to split them this way and put your two independent simple sentences at the beginning and at the end, and then put your dependent right here in the middle. And you're going to have a comma here, but not in front of a dependent clause. And the last way to do it, same exact clauses. You can say, I eat bananas and I twiddle my thumbs when I feel sad. Or I eat bananas when I feel sad and I twiddle my thumbs. Or when I feel sad, comma, I eat bananas and I twiddle my thumbs. Don't overthink it, but try to follow these rules. Hopefully this was helpful.